Thank you very much for having me here. It's always a delight to be able to share some ideas with all of you. After all, we are all doing the same thing in the same business. Whenever I'm asked to give a talk, I always wonder how could I do it better than the last. And I've done it by chronologically arranging the works, sometimes size as well. But today, I realize I really didn't need to think that much further. Because the stars of this occasion is certainly not me, but the participants and the competitors. And I want to take this opportunity immediately to congratulate the two winners. I took a look at some of the works. They are really very well done. And I also want to tell you how happy I am for being able to get two of my colleagues, Melvin and Fiona, involved in this spectacle. And congratulate and thank the organizers for putting this event together. It's been really marvelous, and I've been enjoying every bit of it. And I must say that I'm very happy to be in this great city of Kuala Lumpur. I may live and practice in Singapore, but I am Malaysian. And it's also great to be in this educational setting in Taylor's University. This is actually the first time I've been here, but it's been a great experience. I mentioned I'm Malaysian, but I always forget that I'm actually originally from Terengganu. But I grew up in Penang, and I grew up amidst a family that had rather artistic roots. My father played jazz, painted, sculpted, and relevant to the context today, I was introduced to color from a very early age. Fast forwarding, I always tell people I'm an accidental architect because I went to college intending to be a musician, a pianist. And I think that was where I nearly destroyed myself. But I had good teachers who guided me, teachers who could, by their teachers, trace their lineage all the way back to, believe it or not, Mozart. I hurt my hand 2 years into music school, and then I started drawing. I knew I could draw a little bit. So I started taking architecture classes. I had fantastic teachers, and I graduated as a double major. And I've always thought of myself as a survivor of sorts, surviving in 4 years, doing two rather intensive and laborious majors. I went on to Princeton. Again, had great teachers, and the reason why I wanted to show some of these slides is because I know I'd be speaking to students. I was one such, and don't ever forget the great lessons that you would learn and subsequently use again and again in your career subsequently. In Princeton, I met the great Lillian Tay, some of you might know, who continues to be a good friend and an auditor of sorts to our travel plans with my office. Now, post-Princeton, I went to Syracuse to teach. That's when I came into contact with Werner Seligman, a pedagogical titan in his own right, passionate about teaching, could hold an audience of 18-year-olds for 6 hours in his lectures on Frank Lloyd Wright, Le Corbusier, so on and so forth. I came to Singapore in 1996, and it was a pivotal moment because I met Robert Powell, who's here with us today. Bob has worked on lots of books, and I dare say that more than any other person, Bob, through his books, had actually shaped the consciousness of architects in Singapore. Fast forwarding, we practice out of Singapore right now, and Singapore, like many other modern metropolis has its moments. Entertainment comes to town. It's got its built architecture, it's got its greens, it's got its high rises, low rises. But what is interesting about Singapore is that being an island, it is short of land. So building densely is important. You build as high as you can within the regulations. Every conceivable famous architect in the world has built in Singapore. Public housing is important. About 80% of Singaporeans live in public housing. And where you can preserve, you treat the landmark buildings preciously. And where there is a moment to build, you do it well. Fast forwarding to 2003, that was when RT&Q Architects started. I have a partner, Mr. Quek, the plus Q. Being older and wiser, he runs the administrative aspects of the office. And that liberates me to work with a younger set of colleagues on design and other things. I tell the office that in order to do interesting work, we need a sort of ideological miscarriage. Really think beyond ourselves. But importantly, 3 reminders. One is probably the most important. Never, ever, regardless of what your teachers tell you today, think like an architect. And certainly don't behave like one. And to rely on your counter-intuition when you can, just when you think that you have got the answer, think twice, 3 times, and more ideas will come. And the last thing I tell them is never be afraid to put the wrong thing at the right place. No one knew what the heck I was saying until I brought out this image of Dali's. In the office, we interact rather closely. I don't have an office as such in the office. I don't even have a desk. So what I do is I move around and interact and talk about architecture from desk to desk. This is important because this is really about the young, students and interns. We have a program. For those of you who are interested in coming to Singapore, come by. The first project we normally get interns to do is to build a Le Corbusier model. Travel is an important aspect of the culture of the practice. We have seen a few places. We tend to go back. We don't go to Asia, partly because people go themselves anyway, and the Americas is a little bit geographically too far away. What do we see? We have been drawn to, again, in view of this symposium, the issue of color and how important and useful it can be to heighten our experience of our built environment. We look at things beyond architecture as well. For instance, when we were in Barcelona, I insisted that everyone experienced a game. Even if you are not interested in football, go see the spectacle of the great modern game. We look at artwork, we dine. We found a place where Le Corbusier used to have his lunch. And we even tracked his grave all the way down to right next to Monaco. Today, I tell the office, you must emancipate, you must be yourself, you must be like total footballers, play every position. Don't wait till you are 65 years old before you become a millionaire. Do everything as much as possible. And when, in terms of getting the office involved, I usually get my colleagues to join me. A few days ago, I was in London giving a talk. 2 colleagues in yellow came with me. Today, we have Melvin and Fiona, who were judges yesterday. In terms of work, we have our ups and downs. I am told that we have done over 100 houses amongst the built stuff that we have done. We work predominantly in Malaysia and a little bit of work in Indonesia, but of course in Singapore as well. Now, the design process is important because as the RT of the RT&Q, I do my part. I sketch, and I would encourage all of you guys, the students, don't give up your skill in drawing. Sketch freehand, because it's one of the lessons that I learned that I never forgot. Because the act of sketching is incomplete unto itself, Michael Graves used to tell us. But in its incompleteness, it will suggest the next idea to you. So draw, sketch. In terms of work, I always tell the office, don't lose the plot. Every project must have a thesis. We must always try to rethink aspects of architecture. I bring out the scores of Chopin's 24 etudes. They are exercises, but every piece addresses a different aspect of piano playing. So similarly in architecture, whatever we do, big or small, large or small, there has got to be a message. And again, never behave or think like an architect. Think like a craftsman, because it is really an act, architecture is an act of touching, feeling, using your hands, bending, and really manipulating space. We organize our work in terms of challenges. We work in Singapore. It's crowded. The weather is not unlike here, tropical. Everything is a blur. So we need to put in a little bit of thinking in organizing our work. I have condensed the themes of the work into three themes. One is free and abstract forms. And I'm only going to talk about 5 projects today. Why free and abstract forms? Because of its liberating geometries. We can do small things, big things, long things, low things. We can do cruciform forms. We can do things which we thought are organic forms growing out of one another. We can do cantilevered forms. A few months ago, we suggested this building for a site in Kuala Lumpur. The owner liked it, but told us that it's too dramatic for this site and asked us to think again. So this is interesting because this dramatic thing will happen again and again. This is the first project I wanted to show. It's the Capers in Kuala Lumpur, in Sentul, about 5 kilometers from the city center. For us, it was very exciting because it was our first high-rise. It was only 36 stories, but it felt huge for us. But then when I looked around, it's actually a rather smallish building compared to the other icons. It's in Sentul. It's part of a big master planning project by the developers. The urban fabric of Sentul is, as you see, nondescript, so there was an opportunity to do something. When I got to site, I needed some inspiration. The site was essentially lalang, grassland, and there is high art. The developers were very proud of what they have done, told us to see if we can participate and contribute. We said, of course. There was low art, cow sheds here and there, which was fine. So the inspiration was actually the natural stuff. So I started sketching. And this was the original capers that most of you would not know of. So it was rejected. I was very excited, but then very disappointed by, of all reasons, it was rejected because it was too nice for this site. Previously, it was too dramatic. Now it is too nice. So we were told to do something different, but similar. So I went away thinking, something different, but similar. And I thought back to school days, and I've never forgotten this little cartoon that Adolf Loos describes of his own experience. He was building in Vienna, right across from the palace. And he was looking for inspiration for his own apartment building. So rather than looking at high art and culture, he looked low and for the most unlikely sources of inspiration. So obviously, as you can see in the cartoon, the manhole cover became the facade for this rather celebrated building. One day, I was driving along. running out of ideas, do something similar but different. And I saw these marks, road marks on the floor. And as you can see, that was really the new form for the capers. Now, form for form's sake was just one thing, but I was always interested in what you could do in between the units. And I was interested to see how this can facilitate air movement, which is a real problem in the tropics. Hopefully it works. I've not heard anything about it for a while. Looking at in between units, we try to do different things. Bridge units where you span from one half to the next, enjoying the drama and the view. But I think what is also important is not the high stuff, but the creation of spaces for community and public use when the towers hit the podium. And I've always been asked this question, not 2,000 times, but at least 25 times. So, Rene, how do you clean the building? And it was a concern that was raised once or twice before, but the owners liked the building so much that they say, no problem, we are not going to install gondolas. So we are actually going to use human labor and strength. So one day when they were cleaning the building, they brought me to site to experience it. But again, as you know, it's only half the story, because I wonder what happens to the lower half where it is gravity defying. It won't be so easy. Today, you know that you have done something to the city. When you talk to the taxi driver, I'll tell them, drive me to Capers, this and that. No one understands what the heck I'm talking about. And then one taxi driver would just wave his hand, say, oh, itu Bangkok building. So I say, yes. And then recently as well, the guy told me, without telling him who the architect is, he told me, itu architect Mabuk. Moving on, the second project is the Fennel. It was just completed rather recently. As you can see, it took 12 years to build. So the Fennel was actually the original capers. I guess the developers did rather well with its first set of towers and got us to bring this back. We were happy to do it. As you can see now, it's dense. The challenge was an issue of density, how to place and stagger the buildings so that they don't look into one another. They have ample views and all that. Again, I'm always interested in the space between things. And again, the space between units is important for communal spaces, sky terraces and gardens. We meant it to be sky gardens, but when it was done, the owner liked it so much, he decided not to do the trees. And not just the space between units, the space between the towers as well. While we see what the towers are like, I think what is important is, again, the space between things. So we needed 2 drop-offs because it was an immense project. And what we decided to do, again, rather than just putting a canopy for some shelter and shade, we thought we would do something more dramatic by putting the wrong thing at the right place, the 52-meter swimming pool. And today, as you see it, it becomes a huge canopy. Everyone was a little bit worried about the structure, but I was told it's been well designed. So today, in the end, we ask ourselves what is interesting about this. It's not really the towers for me, but it's providing the occupants, people like you and I, a dramatic experience swimming across a 52-meter pool from one tower to the next. And then again, I had to do my taxi thing. So I got into a taxi and I said, do you know Sentul well? He says, yes, these days Sentul has transformed. And then there is one building, Macam Keris, he told me. So I never thought about it, but now that he mentioned it, I could see the resemblance. And then another taxi driver, I guess he could see the relationship between the capers and the Fennel. He told me, architect Malas. It's essentially the same building. Now, the next project is in Penang, a rather interesting one. Again, it took about more than 10 years to build for a variety of reasons. The developer basically just told us that build this thing so that we can sell, maybe even copy the building next door, which is the venerable E&O Hotel, the Eastern and Oriental. Georgetown, founded by the British, and subsequently a World UNESCO Heritage Site. And that complicated things because there were things that we could do and we couldn't do. Every time I tell the developer and people that it is the nicest site around, yes, he said, no, you're wrong. I said, it is the last site. He says, no, you are wrong. Because it is the only residential site in that part of Penang. So the stakes are high to do something meaningful. The mandate was that every unit must have a sea view. Everyone was hung up about the sea because Penang is an island, so you must have a piece of the sea. So we tried all sorts of things, and I'm glad to tell you that two very important people related to this project are here. One is Fiona, my colleague, who's sitting right there, and a gentleman right next to her, Pang, who is now a student here at Taylor's University. This is what it looked like within the UNESCO World Heritage Site. These are the two initial pictures. I saw when I presented, I told the client, we must create something. And this was right after the Asian tsunami. So I said we must make it appear as though we can bring in the sea, as though the tsunami had just hit the place. And then he told me, please don't do that, it will scare everyone away. I said, no, we have to do it. And we insisted, and I'll teach you a line. I told him that while the fee is negotiable, the idea is not. So that kind of sent him away, and we moved on with things. During marketing, sales, everyone was concerned about the tsunami. I think word got around. And people will ask me, Mr. Tan, how are you preventing the next wave from coming in? I say, we are not going to do anything because, we are going to let the water come in. So that also scared the buyers away, but it's okay. But in truth, of course, every attempt was made to build a seawall that would really not bring the water in. The language of the architecture takes upon street language. And what is important really in the end is the urban planning issues and the site planning. We wanted to create views for every unit, not just towards the sea, but back towards the city as well, because there was a nice park actually just right across the site. So this is what every unit gets to see. An oblique view towards the sea and back towards the city. Not just views out, views across one another as well. The problem was that the site was such that we could only provide for a plot ratio of about 2, which is very low in density for a site like this. So we had this idea of staggering the units front and back. So my front is next to your back, so on and so forth. So that, and in section as well as in plan, so that you have a sense of exclusivity, so that you don't feel as though everyone is looking forward or everyone is looking backwards. So this is what it looks like done recently. But at the end, again, what I was really interested in was not just the views, but how we frame the views so that it provides occupants and visitors with a sense of not space, but place as well. Now this is a short interlude because I'm going to show you two interesting projects. I've been asked, and just within an hour ago when I was interviewed, so Mr. Tan, which is your favorite project? Which is your best ever project? What is your pet project? So on and so forth. We actually have none, but I'll tell you, recently, there are two very interesting projects for the office. The first one is a tombstone. A client just lost his mother and came to us, Rene, I hope you don't mind, can you please help me? On the left is a drawing by the cemetery designer. Concept was to create a home for my dead mother. I said, okay. and asked me if I could make some comments without destroying the concept. So we were talking over lunch. I pulled out a piece of paper and I did a sketch. And we really got into it. I was very interested in it. It doesn't matter whether it's huge, small, low. Design is design. It became an exercise of detailing and thinking about the smallest things ever, how to fit in across, how do you drain rainwater away, a little place for flowers. It took a little bit of time. By the time we went to site, someone else had died and another graveyard had come up. So we have been struggling the last few weeks to literally raise the dead because no one wants to be low next to your dead neighbor. So hopefully it will be built at least as drawn. The second project, no, it's not another tombstone, it's a bus stop. So the mandate was that, Rene, can you please help us design a bus stop in Singapore? I said, sure, if you ask us to design a dustbin, we will do it as well. Because design is design, whether you're in architecture, interior design, so on and so forth. So we tried all sorts of things. And finally, one was picked on the lower right-hand side. The idea was to create an ecologically friendly bus stop. This was what we had. This is what it looks like. A few days ago, it was on the front cover of the Straits Times. The media was interested because this air-conditioned bus stop promises to use only 1/3 of the energy that air conditioning normally uses, and also promises not to release heat back into the space. So it's an environmentally friendly thing. Everyone looks happy, including the 4 women. But mind you, I would admit this was staged because there were 4 colleagues from the office. The next genre of things, one was you saw abstract geometries and all that. The primitive hut, because sometimes people come to us, Rene, we like your work, RT&Q, we appreciate what you have done, but please don't make it too abstract because we want a house that looks like a house. So we said, okay, no problem. And I've always been interested in this sort of forms, but we try to make it a little bit more contemporary, where when the need arises, we splice the form, we create it in glass, or even use different materials like mesh. The next project, the third of the 5 projects I wanted to show you, is this thing called the House with Bridges. It has been, I think, published quite often. It won us a few awards. So the client, this woman, this is an interesting story, comes to us and says, Rene, design us a house with a big garden, and came in with something that she had already drawn up. So I spent about not 5 hours, but at least 2 hours listening to her go on and on. She was sketching and trying to explain to me. So I got a little bit tired, so I went away and I came back. I showed her this painting by Henry Rousseau. I said, would it be accurate to say that you are this lady? And she looked at it and said, yeah, actually it's true. So what she wants to do is to have a house with a big garden where she can look out with a little bit of cover, and for people to look back in, but not totally so. So that's fine. So I went to the site, I saw this thing. She bought this land knowing that she couldn't use half of the land because the terrain was so steep that about half the land could not be used. So it's a structural challenge, and that was the thesis for us. But that was just only the architectural thesis. So after telling me about the garden, she leans forward to me and said, Rene, I have a secret to tell you. So I just got remarried. I said, okay, that's fine, that's great, congratulations. And she tells me that my new husband is a very private one, so he likes to be near his garden, his own quarters. So I said, no problem, we will put him at the top. And then she was happy, but I knew that she was uncomfortable. She told me, I've got something else I have to tell you. I said, okay. She said, I have an old father who's 80 years old and who wants to live with me. So can you please do something, design the house in such a way that the two men, the old and the new, don't run into one another. So I said, no problem. This is all very relevant because you solve people's habits and life through design. So I was already very tired, but I was listening. But I knew that she still wanted to tell me something. She said, Rene, I have to tell you one more thing. My ex-husband and I have remained very friendly, and he comes back to visit. Not me, but my son. So that's fair and square. So can you create a house for us such that the three men don't run into one another? I said, no problem. We'll figure out something. I hope this is not recorded. So when it's done, I told her, I have something to tell you. This is going to be the most difficult house we have ever done. And true enough, it took about 2 years to build. A smallish house in Kuala Lumpur. We couldn't touch the rear retaining wall because the authorities, fearing that we would damage it and erode the soil, we could not touch it, and we came within inches of touching it. We had to cut the I-beam, and because of the cantilevered nature, and hence you'll see the house with bridges, we had to go deep for the structure. This is what it looks like. And on a jury, talking about jurors, when the jurors came to site, they were actually waiting outside the White House. So I was asking them, why are you there? And the head of the juror asked me, which house are we looking at? So I didn't even say anything. I just led them to the left house. Put the right thing at the wrong place. Bridges, conservatories, glass houses in places that you least expected. The house with bridges, escape routes and ingress for the men who come and go. It became a motif for us. A lot of things had this cantilevered aspect. It was a fun house for us to do because we managed to design right down to the smallest detail. And in the end, the woman gets what she wants, her own little space, looking out with a lot of glass and a lot of light. And after all, this is a woman who thinks she wants to live amongst the animals and amongst the three men. The fourth project that I wanted to show you is a challenge of tradition. We call it the Bali house in Indonesia. We did it some years ago. I think like a lot of architects and designers, you really get excited about the prospects of doing something in Bali, because I think the stuff in Bali has actually affected our thinking about tropical architecture. But the problem was the architecture there is so traditional, such that you are even afraid to do new things. Everyone knows the virtues of Balinese architecture. So we were told by the clients, Rene, can you design us a beach house? So I went to site. This is at Batu Jimba, near in Sanur itself. A very good neighborhood. I was told that Mick Jagger got married to Jerry Hall, but subsequently divorced. They got married there. And a recent client of ours, Melvin's client, also got married there at this sacred place of Batu Jimba. Subsequently also divorced. But the interesting thing is when I went there, I realized we have to design a beach house without a beach. So what do we do? I always like to show this slide because it brings back things that I had learned in school, and I would urge you, never forget lessons you learned in school. How do you use it in a new light, within new ideas? The program is very simple. Parents in a primitive hut in a pondok. Daughter 1 and daughter 2 can't wait to just disappear into their own quarters. And then right down at the bottom, communal space. The wife wanted the biggest kitchen, the longest living room, of that sort of thing. So okay, we put 3 pondoks primitive huts on top of it. 5 years ago, it looked like on the left. Recently, I was sent a picture. The planting has grown quite well. In fact, too well. You don't even see the architecture anymore, but it's okay. I think they are happy. I had wrong preconceived notions on how we could have done this. I thought, okay, fine, we could prefabricate the things and just bring them to site. But I couldn't be more wrong because the streets were so narrow, the trucks couldn't come in. So we had to prefab the barn and built it element by element. Methods were rather primitive. And this is interesting. I show up on site one day, I say, oh, why is the spiral staircase cut up so badly? They said, oh, Bali, you cannot do good steel work. So this spiral staircase, it wasn't a simple thing. Had to be done in Jakarta, lorried across Java, and put on a boat. And the little boat that they got was too small for the whole thing, so they had to cut this damn thing up into a few pieces and made several trips across the straits. So when I showed up the next time, they had already put it together. And I said I missed the opportunity because in the end, we could have just left the connection marks and the joins to actually tell the story of how this thing was created. Everything that we specified in Singapore had to be thrown out because the owner just told us, Rene, it's too expensive. You guys are crazy, naive, typical Singaporeans. Yeah. So he said, how about timber from old boats from Kalimantan? So I was listening. I said, okay, why don't we do it? I showed up another time. The drawn wall was so boring, I got a shock. I picked up a piece of chalk, sketched out a few things, and inserted some timber just to rescue the wall and to make it look better. Another occasion, I come to site. I visited once a month during construction. I see these two guys arguing about where and how to throw out the timber. I said, please don't. We are not the most green architects, but we can reuse a few things. I did a little sketch, and they built the screens. And then the owner tells me later, about a month later, Rene, total disaster. Why? Because my wife and my two daughters refused to use the bathrooms because they felt that it was too open. But I knew that it wouldn't be an issue, so we got past that. And then I also told the owner, again, the tsunami thing. I said, a beach house without the beach and the sea. Let's make it look as though a tsunami actually just hit your property and your buildings are just floating all over the place. They looked at me. They were a little bit afraid but confused. I showed them this picture. I said, this was exactly what I meant from day one, but I didn't tell you. Put the right thing at the wrong place. But at the end of it, I think they were happy. They had the equivalent of the village BOMO to come and bless the place. Everyone was happy, they did their rites. And then the owner comes and tells me, Rene, thank you for building this vacation house for us. My wife has become so happy. She has become so calm. She leaves me alone these days. I said, okay, that's good. And then my two daughters, thank goodness, they go to their rooms. We don't see them anymore, but that's okay. And then he tells me, Rene, I have an idea. I want to give the house a name. So I said, what is it? So I said, Rene, I've thought of this name. It's in Sanskrit. So it's Svarga. And not unlike Malay, Svarga is Shwarga. It means heaven. What do you think? So I said, actually, it's a very good idea. It sounds nice, and it sounds maybe too nice, and I think you have a problem. So he asked me, what is the problem, Svarga? I said, Anton, Svarga sounds too much like Viagra. So the good thing is that this guy had some sense of humor, so he said, no problem. Svarga or Viagra, both are heavenly. And just the last bits. People do come to us, and these people are developers. Rene, don't make your stuff too Western. Some will say, don't make it too Eastern. I need to sell the house for 30 million. So don't do something too Asian that the Russian will be turned off. Or don't do anything too European looking that the Chinese tauke would not know how to appreciate. So what is important for us, and I think this is the path that the architecture practice is sort of focused on, is to do something that is styleless. There is no style at all. But just focus on the rudiments of architecture. Architecture needs a roof, like the primitive hut. It needs a little bit of structure. It needs a skin to keep the aircon in. And that's pretty much it. That's all it needs. So it has become an exercise of proportion, scale, sensible materials, easy to maintain architecture. And lately, we have been doing quite a few houses, and it's a very important thing for us because it really focuses us on the elements of architecture rather than style and image. At the end, all values, core values, space is important. Rather than putting the throne in a nice room, put the WC. Think about light, think about materials and how it affects space. And in the spirit of the sponsorship of this conference, we have been using color, and I must admit, we don't use it enough, although we know, and you know, that color has the power to transform space and architecture. Space is important, whether it's two-dimensional, vertical, or horizontal. Medium scale or larger scale in an urban context. And today, clients do come to us, Rene, can you do us things that are RT&Q, but do not look like RT&Q? So we have been scratching our heads, so we have begun to split our houses, tear them apart, rip them apart, but that's all stories for another occasion. Thank you.